October 15, 1943, Luftwaffe. Base Smolensk. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber stood before a room of exhausted pilots, their faces illuminated by the dim light of paraffin lamps. The meeting had been called after 3 consecutive nights of disrupted operation. Supply dumps had been hit, ammunition trains derailed, and perhaps most critically, not a single man had managed more than 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep. The front line was deteriorating, and Berlin demanded explanation. Weber's mission was simple: address the phantom menace that struck with impunity each night, then vanished into the darkness before dawn. "Gentlemen," Weber began, a slight smirk forming at the corner of his mouth, "High Command is concerned about our recent setbacks against the Soviets' secret weapon." He paused for effect. Women, flying crop dusters. The room erupted in laughter. Yes, Moscow has become so desperate they've sent their secretaries and farm girls to fight in wooden relics my grandfather would consider obsolete. More laughter followed. These so-called night witches fly sewing machines with wings, carrying bombs they drop by hand. A woman's place is in the kitchen, not the cockpit, Weber continued, raising his schnapps glass. To the Soviet Union's generosity, sending us targets that can't even break 100 kilometers per hour. The officers toasted, confident these peasant women in flying coffins would soon be eliminated. What Hauptmann Weber didn't know was that at that very moment, the night witches were already airborne, executing another precision raid that would contribute to their eventual 24,000 bombing run. The 40 female pilots who comprised the regiment had by this point already completed nearly 7,000 of those missions, systematically dismantling German logistics one night at a time. These women, most barely 20 years old, some as young as 18, had dropped over 3,000 tons of explosives while flying aircraft that German engineering manuals classified as unsuitable for combat operation. And in less than 4 hours, Weber's own headquarters would be struck by these supposed amateurs, destroying his communications center and 3 fuel depots. The irony of his mockery would not be recorded for posterity. German night-air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, had been built upon painful lessons. During the Battle of Britain, Luftwaffe pilots had suffered 17% casualties from preventable incidents, engine failures, navigation, and simple disorientation in darkness. By 1941, Göring had mandated comprehensive requirements for all-night operation. Aircraft must maintain minimum speeds of 180 mph to evade British interceptors. Enclosed, heated cockpits became mandatory after 11 pilots froze to death during winter operations over the English Channel. Radio equipment was standardized after 3 mid-air collisions between German aircraft in a single night. Parachute, once considered optional weight, became required after statistical analysis revealed 30% of pilot deaths could have been prevented by proper bailout procedure. The Junkers Ju-88 night fighter emerged as the perfect embodiment of these requirements, capable of 300 MEP speeds, crewed by 4 specialists, equipped with UFUG-220 Liechtenstein radar, and powered by twin engines generating 2,400 horsepower. Between 1940 and 1942, these aircraft had destroyed 357 British bombers. German confidence wasn't mere arrogance. It had been earned through technological superiority and proven combat effectiveness. While German engineers perfected these requirements, the night witches were proving them irrelevant. On June 8, 1943, a formation of 3 POW biplanes approached a German ammunition depot near Kursk. Flying at treetop level, they navigated using only paper maps and pocket watches. Their aircraft carried no radio. Pilots communicated through hand signals illuminated by the moonlight. They wore no parachutes, as their operational altitude made them pointless. Their cruise speed of 94 from km, well below the German minimum requirement, allowed them to approach in near silence. The lead pilot cut her engine 5 kilometers from target, gliding in darkness toward the depot. Bombs were released manually, guided by nothing but experience and instinct. All 3 aircraft struck their targets and disappeared before a single searchlight activated. This was mission 8954 of what would eventually become their 24,000 bombing runs. German incident reports classified the attack as inexplicable and statistically improbable, given the technological limitations the aircraft involved. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established. The Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes were, in essence, flying kindling, constructed primarily of canvas stretched over wooden frame with minimal metal components. The open cockpits subjected pilots to temperatures reaching -40 degrees, causing severe frostbite that left many with permanent tissue damage. Pilots reported their breath forming ice on their eyelashes, temporarily blinding them during critical flight operations. These aircraft carried no defensive equipment whatsoever. No radios meant navigation by visual landmark only. No parachutes saved weight, but guaranteed death if critically damaged. No armor plating meant any bullet that found its mark would likely find flesh. The specifications comparison was absurd. While the Ju-88 cruised comfortably at 300 mm, the PO-2 struggled to maintain 94 mm at full throttle. German engines produced 2,400 horsepower. The Soviet M11 engine generated barely 100. The Ju-88 represented cutting-edge 1940s engineering. The PO-2 had been designed in 1928, making many of these aircraft older than the women flying them. Production costs told the story most starkly. Each PO-2 cost approximately $5,000 to manufacture compared to the Ju-88's $80,000. A PO-2 could be built in 3 weeks. The Ju-88 required 3 months of precision assembly. The very concept, women flying wooden training aircraft converted to bombers, dropping explosives by hand, seemed like a dark joke rather than military strategy. What German engineers saw as fatal weakness, the Night Witches transformed into advantages. Their aircraft's simplicity allowed for extraordinary operational tempo, impossible for German bombers to match. Between missions, a PO-2 could be refueled in 4 minutes and rearmed in 3, enabling rapid turnaround that maximized their effectiveness. During one remarkable night, a single squadron completed 18 consecutive missions between dusk and dawn, a pace no Luftwaffe unit could sustain. The canvas construction, while offering no protection, meant bullets often passed through without finding vital system. After one mission in August 1943, a Night Witch landed with 37 bullet holes in her aircraft's canvas skin, yet all control systems remained functional. As one pilot reportedly observed after examining the damage, "If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, that bullet would have ricocheted until it found me or something critical." Germans designed aircraft to fight their war. We designed tactics to fight ours. By mission 15,000 of their eventual 24,000, the regiment had developed techniques that rendered conventional air defense nearly useless against them. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment from April 1943 concluded the Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents a desperate measure indicating severe pilot shortages and declining manufacturing capacity. The wooden construction and primitive equipment render these aircraft extremely vulnerable to both interception and ground fire. Physical laws remain immutable. Superior speed, metallic construction, and modern avionics will invariably triumph over slow, wooden, obsolete design. We project operations will cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. Calculated advantages include a 3.1 speed ratio in our favor, 24.1 horsepower differential, and 15.1 cost efficiency benefiting the enemy. While these nuisance raids create temporary morale impact through sleep disruption, they pose no serious operational threat to Wehrmacht logistics. Recommendation: monitor but assign no priority to special countermeasures development. This assessment carried the full authority of Reichsluftfahrtministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. It was wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, the Night Witches were systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure. On the very night the assessment was finalized, they executed a precision strike against a German rail junction near Orel, destroying 17 supply wagons containing winter uniforms and medical supplies. By this point, they had conducted over 16,000 missions, rapidly approaching the 24,000 bombing runs that would eventually make them one of the most decorated units in Soviet aviation. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable losses across the Eastern Front, creating supply shortages that contradicted the assessment's dismissive conclusion. The disparity between theoretical vulnerability and practical effectiveness grew with each successful mission. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error. Their logic seemed sound. Ju-88 fighters traveling at 300 mm versus PO-2 biplane, limping along at 94, created a 3.2x speed advantage. This should have meant easy interception and destruction of the slower aircraft. What they critically overlooked was that interception requires matching speed, not just exceeding it. The aerodynamic paradox centered on stall speed, the minimum velocity an aircraft must maintain to generate sufficient lift. The Ju-88, with its higher wing loading and aerodynamic design, stalled at approximately 120 Messerschmitt, meaning it would literally fall from the sky if flying slower. Meanwhile, the PO-2, with its large biplane configuration, operated comfortably at 80 mph and could glide effectively at 60 mph with its engine off. The Night Witches deliberately flew below German minimum survivable speed, creating an impossible scenario. German pilots must either fly past too fast to effectively engage or slow down and risk catastrophic stall. No middle ground existed. This paradox was documented in a specific failed intercept on September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt, flying a Bf-109, reduced speed to 130 mph while pursuing a Soviet biplane. The target throttled back to approximately 70 mph in a shallow glide. Schmidt's aircraft began showing stall warnings, buffeting controls, and deteriorating response, forcing him to abort the intercept. His after-action report noted simply, target speed below minimum engagement threshold. Understanding this, physics made the Night Witches untouchable on their path to 24,000 bombing run. During mission 19427, a formation encountered a patrolling Bf-110 night fighter. The lead pilot immediately throttled to minimum power and descended to just 15 meters above the ground. The German fighter made 3 separate passes, overshooting each time as the Polikarpov pilots maintained their agonizingly slow pace. On the final attempt, the German pilot approached his aircraft's stall speed, wings visibly wobbling as control surfaces lost effectiveness. Faced with the choice between crashing or aborting, he chose the latter. This tactic, repeated across their 24,000 mission, proved the PO-2's slowness was its greatest weapon. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed, and the Night Witches flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. While Luftwaffe engineers had meticulously designed their aircraft to intercept high-speed bombers like the Soviet Il-4 or PE-2, which typically cruised at speeds exceeding 250 mph, they had never anticipated combating aircraft that flew at bicycle speeds. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 night fighters were optimized for chase scenarios, not for matching glacially slow targets. The fundamental physics of flight created an impossible dilemma. Every aircraft must maintain a minimum airspeed to generate sufficient lift, or it will literally fall from the sky. German fighters cruising at 300 mph would inevitably overshoot a target, moving at 1/3 their speed. Slowing to 150 mph brought them dangerously close to their stall threshold of 120 mph, where control surfaces began to lose effectiveness and wings generated insufficient lift. Meanwhile, the PO-2 operated comfortably at 80 mph and could glide efficiently at just 60 mph, creating an untouchable zone where physics itself became their shield. German pilot training emphasized pursuit tactics rather than precision slow-speed engagement. At high-speed differential, their target acquisition window collapsed to a mere 2 to 3 seconds. Insufficient time to achieve weapons lock when passing a target at a relative speed exceeding 200 mph. On the night of October 23, 1943, a Night Witch demonstrated this advantage on her 12,128th mission of their eventual 24,000 bombing run. Approaching a German fuel depot near Orel, she detected the distinctive engine sound of a Bf-110 night fighter searching the area. Her immediate response was precisely what German tactical manuals considered suicidal. She throttled back to minimum power, reducing her airspeed to approximately 65 mph and descending to just 30 meters above the ground. The German fighter made 4 separate passes, overshooting each time as its pilot struggled against the physics that prevented him from matching her speed. His frustration became visible in increasingly desperate maneuvers, wobbling wings as he approached stall speed, followed by steep bankings attempting to circle back for another attempt. Each pass gave the Night Witch precious seconds to adjust her course toward the target. She completed her bombing run while the German fighter burned through fuel, attempting interception. The fuel depot erupted in flames as she slipped away into the darkness. In his after-action report, the German pilot documented target evasion successful despite multiple engagement attempts, and recommended specialized tactics development for low-speed interception scenarios. By mission 15,000 of their eventual 24,000, this tactic had been perfected across the regiment, rendering conventional fighter interception nearly useless. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO-2's greatest vulnerability: its primitive construction. The physics of bullet impacts created an unexpected paradox. In conventional metal aircraft, when a bullet struck aluminum skin, it penetrated the surface, created shrapnel, and then ricocheted inside the fuselage, potentially hitting fuel line, hydraulic systems, control cables, or crew members. German ammunition had been specifically designed for metal targets, with explosive rounds and incendiary tracers optimized to cause maximum damage to aluminum structure. Armor-piercing rounds wasted their energy penetrating non-existent armor plating. In stark contrast, when bullets struck a canvas aircraft, they simply passed through the fabric, exited the other side, and continued their trajectory without transferring significant energy to the airframe. Bullets passing through wooden frames made clean holes unless they directly hit a structural spar, which comprised less than 5% of the aircraft's cross-section. The vital system, engine, fuel tank, and crew, occupied a remarkably small percentage of the aircraft's volume, creating statistical protection through empty space. Even when canvas tore, it didn't significantly affect aerodynamics, unlike metal aircraft where punctures created drag-inducing deformation. Most critically, repairs took minutes rather than hours. A canvas patch could be applied in 30 minutes, compared to metal welding requiring specialized equipment and technical expertise. German pilots increasingly reported hitting the aircraft without achieving kills. Bullets passed through without apparent effect on flight capability. During her 748th mission on April 17, 1944, a Night Witch proved this advantage definitively. Caught in a momentary searchlight beam while bombing a German artillery position, her aircraft absorbed concentrated fire from 420mm flak cannons. She completed her bombing run and returned to base with the aircraft riddled with 73 bullet holes, 42 through the lower wing alone. Inspection revealed 3 rounds had passed through the cockpit area, one missing her head by less than 10 centimeters. The wooden spar had sustained a single hit that cracked but didn't sever the structural member. Ground crew members were astonished the aircraft remained airborne, yet after applying canvas patches and basic woodworking repairs, declared it airworthy for immediate return to service. She flew 4 more missions that night in the same damaged aircraft, pushing their total closer to the 24,000 bombing runs they would eventually complete. When a visiting Soviet Air Force general expressed concern about the aircraft's condition, she reportedly responded, "In their metal planes, I would be dead. In our plywood and canvas, I am merely ventilate. The Germans waste their ammunition on air." That single PO-2 would carry her through 82 more missions before finally being retired, not from combat damage but from accumulated wood fatigue in the main spar. But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale, exploiting fundamental weaknesses in their defensive system. German searchlight and anti-aircraft artillery relied primarily on acoustic detection to locate night bombers. Sound-ranging equipment triangulated engine noise to provide targeting data to defensive systems. Their standard procedure followed a predictable sequence: hear approaching engines, activate searchlights in the calculated sector, commence anti-aircraft fire, and finally scramble night fighters if bombers penetrated the outer defenses. The Night Witches discovered a tactic, possibly accidentally at first, that rendered this entire sophisticated defensive network useless. They would approach at approximately 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle, allowing Germans to hear and prepare for their arrival. Then at precisely 3,000 feet from target, they would idle their engines completely. The PO-2 would then glide in total silence for 5 to 6 minutes, making them acoustically invisible to German sound detection equipment. They could drop bombs before Germans realized aircraft were overhead, only restarting engines after bombs had exploded and defensive fire was concentrated on the wrong location. The physics made this possible. The PO-2's glide ratio of approximately 110 meant it could travel forward 10 feet for every 1 foot of altitude loss. From 3,000 feet, this translated to 30,000 feet of gliding distance, approximately 5.6 miles. At a glide speed of 60 Mach, this provided 5-6 minutes of completely silent approach. The only sound was the soft rustling of wind through canvas wing, virtually undetectable against ambient battlefield noise. The psychological effect was devastating. German soldiers would hear approaching aircraft, prepare for attack, then experience complete silence, followed by unexpected explosions from an apparently empty sky. On the night of June 22, 1944, during her record-breaking 18th sortie of that night, a night which employed this silent approach against a German command post, coordinating local counterattacks. Her initial approach with engine running at full power alerted German defenses, which activated searchlights and prepared anti-aircraft position. At precisely 2,800 feet from target, she cut her engine completely, transforming her aircraft into a silent glider. As she passed directly over German position, she could hear soldiers calling to each other below. "Where are they?" The engines stopped. German searchlights swept frantically across empty sky as she descended in perfect silence. She released bombs on the command post while defenders were still searching the wrong quadrant. The explosions illuminated their upturned faces as they realized too late what had happened. She restarted her engine only after clearing the target area by nearly a kilometer. She would repeat this silent approach across countless missions, contributing to their eventual 24,000 bombing runs. As she later explained to new pilots joining the regiment, "We were ghosts. They couldn't fight. They feared the silence more than the bomb. By the time they heard our engines restart, we were already somewhere else." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality. The Ju-88 Night Fighter impressed engineering officers with its specification: 300 mph, top speed, 2,400 horsepower from twin engine, Fuji 220 radar system, comprehensive radio suite, armor plating, and a specialized crew of 4. Each aircraft cost approximately $80,000, $200,000 Reichsmark, and required 3 months to build, demanding skilled labor and precision manufacturing throughout the process. Yet its operational tempo proved surprisingly limited. Crews could fly a maximum of 1 or 2 sorties per night before exhaustion compromised effectiveness. Between missions, maintenance required 3 to 4 hours as technicians performed systems checks, refueling, rearming, and allowing crew rest period. The coordination of 4 specialists operating complex equipment in high-stress environment led to rapid fatigue. The average Ju-88 Night Fighter career encompassed just 40-60 missions before the aircraft was lost, or the crew rotated out due to combat stress. Their survival rate hovered around 60%, with many losses attributable to weather, navigation error, and mechanical failures rather than direct combat. The contrast with PO-2 reality was striking. Its primitive specification, 94 mph maximum speed, 100 horsepower engine, no radar, no radio, no armor, and a crew of just 2 suggested inferiority in every category. Each aircraft cost merely $5,000 and could be built in 3 weeks using minimal skilled labor. Yet its operational tempo proved astounding. Crews routinely flew 8 to 18 sorties per night. Maintenance between missions took a mere 7 minutes total, 4 minutes for refueling, 3 minutes for reloading bomb. Crew coordination developed naturally between 2 women who had flown hundreds of missions together, often communicating through subtle aircraft movements rather than words. The average Night Witch career encompassed 800 to 1,000 missions, equivalent to 20 times the operational lifespan of their German counterparts. Their survival rate reached an astonishing 96.8%, with losses almost entirely attributable to ground fire rather than fighter interception. This created a stunning paradox. The more expensive, sophisticated aircraft delivered lower operational effectiveness, while the simpler, cheaper aircraft achieved higher operational effectiveness. What Germans considered technological advantages became logistical disadvantages in sustained operation. These statistics were embodied in the Night Witch's operational record. During one remarkable night of activity, a single squadron began operations at 2200 hours and concluded at 0530 hours, completing 18 sorties within this time frame. Each mission cycle, flying to target, bombing, returning, refueling, reloading, and launching again, averaged just 25 minutes. Ground crew efficiency reached such levels that mechanics could prepare aircraft faster than the pilots could walk from debriefing to cockpit. During these 18 missions, they delivered approximately 7 tons of bombs, striking German ammunition dumps, barracks, vehicle parks, command posts, and communication centers. German casualties were estimated at 37 killed and 64 wounded, with significant material losses. For comparison, the most accomplished Luftwaffe pilot documented flying a maximum of 4 sorties in one night, less than a quarter of the Night Witch's tempo. By this point in the war, their progress toward 24,000 bombing runs was becoming legendary, even among German soldiers who developed superstitious rituals to protect themselves when they heard the distinctive sound of POW engines approaching their position. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern that contradicted all established military economics. German expenditure attempting to stop the Night Witches had reached staggering proportions. Anti-aircraft batteries had fired over 2 million rounds specifically targeting these nocturnal raiders. At an average cost of 50 Reichsmarks per anti-aircraft shell, this represented 100 million Reichsmark, approximately $40 million USD, expended on ammunition alone. Dedicated fighter intercept attempts numbered over 1,000 sorties, each costing approximately 500 Reichsmark in operational expenses, totaling 500,000 Reichsmarks in aviation maintenance and crew hours. Special searchlight batteries, numbering over 200 units, had been deployed specifically for night defense against low-altitude attackers. Personnel assignments included more than 5,000 soldiers dedicated to countering night harassment raids. The total German cost invested in countering the Night Witches exceeded 150 million Reichsmarks, an astronomical sum for stopping what they still officially classified as a nuisance threat. Meanwhile, Soviet investment in the entire 508th Regiment remained remarkably modest, 40 PO-2 aircraft at approximately $5,000. Each represented just $200,000 in aircraft value. Their ammunition costs represented a fraction of the defensive ammunition expended against them. Personnel included only 80 pilots, navigators, and minimal ground crew, perhaps a 150 personnel total. The entire Soviet investment likely remained under $2 million USD for the regiment's complete operational lifespan. This created an astonishing cost ratio. Germans were spending 25.1, attempting to stop what Soviets had spent creating. Most disturbing to German command staff, despite this massive investment, they had achieved 0 confirmed fighter kills against Night Witches. The regiment represented perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal investment, producing maximum enemy resource drain. The Night Witches personally represented this asymmetric efficiency. If Germans fired an average of 1,000 rounds attempting to hit a Night Witch per mission, their 24,000 bombing runs meant 24 million rounds fired at these women. At 50 Reichsmarks per round, this represented 1.2 billion Reichsmarks spent trying to kill 40 women. The result, 38 survived the war. Their bombs destroyed an estimated 35 million Reichsmarks in ammunition, 80 million Reichsmarks in vehicles and aircraft, caused approximately 3,000 German casualties, and degraded infrastructure worth incalculable strategic value. For comparison, the average USAAF bomber crew rotated home after 25 missions, considered a full combat tour. The Night Witches completed the equivalent of 960 American tours of duty. A single Night Witch represented more combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters fly in their complete service history. Their 24,000 bombing runs made them one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets, and the Night Witches had no intention of stopping. As German High Command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation. On November 12, 1943, near Neville, a PO-2 aircraft experienced engine failure while returning from a bombing run. Unable to reach Soviet lines, the pilot attempted an emergency landing in a snow-covered field. German infantry patrol from the 290th Infantry Division intercepted the aircraft before the crew could destroy it or escape. 2 crew members were captured alive and transported to division headquarters for immediate interrogation. Oberleutnant Werner Müller, the intelligence officer assigned to the interrogation, entered the room expecting to question male pilots. The prisoners sat huddled in blankets, still wearing their flight gear minus outer garments. When ordered to remove their flight helmet, Müller found himself staring at 2 young women. His initial report documented the moment. Prisoners identified as Senior Lieutenant Yekaterina Ryabova and Navigator Alexandra Volkova, 588th Night Bomber Regiment, both female, ages 21 and 19. Have conducted 418 and 360 missions respectively. Prisoners maintain defiant attitude despite circumstances. Claim entire regiment consists of female flight personnel and ground crew. Initially considered this Soviet disinformation, but documentation found an aircraft confirms consistent mission log with female names throughout. Request immediate guidance on verification protocol. Müller's report reached Lieutenant Colonel Dieter Hoffmann, the battalion commander, who initially dismissed it as Soviet propaganda designed to embarrass German forces if publicized. However, within the same week, reports from 2 other sectors arrived with similar detail. A crashed PO-2 recovered near Smolensk contained a logbook with female pilot entry. Documents captured during a brief overrun of a Soviet airfield listed flight rosters with distinctly feminine names. Hoffmann reluctantly forwarded the accumulated evidence to divisional headquarters, marking it requires verification, possible deception operation. The reports ascended through command echelon, meeting similar skepticism at each level. General Wilhelm Hartmann at Army Group Center headquarters initially threatened to court-martial officers spreading Soviet propaganda, but ordered verification nonetheless. Wehrmacht intelligence finally confirmed the 508th Night Bomber Regiment was indeed an all-female unit that had been operational since May 1942. By early December, High Command had received enough evidence to warrant a formal briefing. General Franz Halder presented the findings to a room of senior officers. The evidence was undeniable. Intelligence photographs showing women in flight suits boarding PO-2 aircraft, captured documents with female names on mission log, consistent prisoner testimony, and perhaps most compelling, identical aircraft serial numbers appearing in multiple raid reports over many months. The verification process cross-referenced Night Witch raid patterns with known female piloted missions, finding perfect correlation. The conclusion became unavoidable. The nocturnal harassment that had cost millions in resources, degraded troop morale, and disrupted supply lines had been orchestrated and executed entirely by Soviet women, most under 25 years old. The revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command structure. Initial disbelief gave way to profound discomfort as the implications became clear. Elite Luftwaffe pilots had been systematically outmaneuvered by women flying obsolete training aircraft, a reality that contradicted every aspect of Nazi doctrine regarding gender roles. Some officers demanded classified status for all related intelligence, fearing the propaganda value to Soviet forces, if widely known. Others insisted the women must be exception, perhaps male-trained anomalies rather than representative of Soviet capability. The practical concern extended beyond humiliation. If German intelligence had so catastrophically misjudged female combat pilots, what other fundamental assumptions about Soviet forces might be equally flawed? Luftwaffe's squadron commanders reported alarming reactions among their pilots. Several experienced night fighter crews requested transfers to Western Front operations rather than continue unsuccessful intercept missions. Others began referring to failed engagements as mechanical issue or weather complication, rather than admit their inability to down aircraft piloted by women. Field Marshal Walter Model issued a directive that circulated through frontline command. Operational Order 4427, dated December 17, 1943, All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender. This directive is issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop morale. Discussion of enemy personnel characteristics beyond tactical relevance is hereby prohibited. Despite official suppression, frontline soldiers developed their own response. The nickname Nachthexen, night witches, spread rapidly through German ranks, initially as a term of derision, but gradually acquiring notes of grudging respect mixed with superstitious fear. Some units began requesting dedicated anti-night witch resources, while others simply added it to their growing list of Soviet threats requiring adaptation. While German command struggled with the revelation, a night witch was flying her 1943rd mission of their eventual 24,000. Completely unaware Germans had just confirmed her regiment's gender composition. The discovery meant nothing to her operational routine. On the night of December 18, 1943, as German headquarters was distributing Model's directive prohibiting gender references, she led a 3-aircraft formation against a German rail junction near Vitebsk. Their bombs destroyed 7 ammunition cars and damaged the rail switching mechanism, delaying reinforcements to the front by nearly 36 hours. When later asked about German discovery of the regiment's composition, she reportedly shrugged. "We didn't fly to prove women could fight. We flew to kill fascists. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bomb." The discovery changed nothing operational. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners held in camps throughout Europe and Russia. When debriefing officers asked about Eastern Front experience, particularly regarding night operation, an unexpected consistency emerged in responses to questions about the night witches. Even hardened SS officers who had maintained stoic demeanors throughout other questioning showed visible reactions when this topic arose. Across hundreds of interviews between 1945 and 1946, a clear pattern of respect and frustration emerged in nearly every account. Oberleutnant Klaus Reimann, a Ju-88 night fighter pilot captured in April 1945, provided one of the most comprehensive testimonies. "We received orders to intercept these aircraft in September 1943. Command didn't tell us they were women. We only learned after the war ended. I attempted interception 17 times, 17 failures. The aircraft were too slow for engagement. My stall warnings would activate every time I tried to match their speed. It was humiliating. You train for years to master the Ju-88. You face British Lancaster bombers. You understand air combat. Then a wooden biplane makes you look foolish. When I learned after surrender they were women, I pause in transcript. I had no words. We couldn't catch them because physics wouldn't let us. Gender was irrelevant. They had beaten the laws of aerodynamics itself. Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, a flak battery commander from the eastern Ukraine sector, offered another perspective. My battery fired an estimated 18,000 rounds at these aircraft between February 1943 and January 1944. We achieved perhaps 3 or 4 hits across that entire period. They would approach with engines loud. We would prepare. Then, silence. We would fire at where we thought they were, but we were shooting at ghosts. The sound would return after bombs exploded. Psychological effect on my men was severe. Some refused night duty. Others fired at shadows. We feared the silence more than the bomb. Learning they were women only added to the sense that we had underestimated everything about this enemy. These testimonies revealed consistent patterns, despite coming from soldiers who had never met. Almost every account mentioned the silence and its psychological impact. Many described identical experiences of failed interceptions due to the speed differential. The universal shock upon learning the pilot's gender was typically followed by attempts to rationalize. Many initially claimed Soviet propaganda exaggerated female involvement before eventually acknowledging the truth. A common phrase appeared in various forms across multiple testimonies. We couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed. Several mentioned specific night witches by reputation or aircraft marking, having learned to recognize particular planes that frequently appeared over their position. Perhaps most significantly, these testimonies represented a complete reversal of pre-war German propaganda about Soviet inferiority. Some testimonies referenced specific night witches, though often without knowing their name. Lieutenant Otto Werner, an infantry officer captured near Königsberg, recalled, "There was one aircraft we learned to recognize, had distinctive pattern of repair patches on both lower wing. This aircraft appeared over our positions at least twice weekly. We began calling it the Ghost because it would arrive in silence. I witnessed this aircraft's attacks 11 times personally. On April 4, 1944, it destroyed our ammunition depot with perfect accuracy. On April 28th, it hit our command post, killing 3 officers, including our battalion commander. After the war, I learned from Soviet records this was likely Lieutenant from the 588th Regiment. She had flown over 800 of the regiment's 24,000 missions. We never came close to shooting her down. She was untouchable. Our men would hear her engine cut and immediately run for cover. They knew what followed. The night witches knew Germans were capturing their comrade. 8 pilots were taken prisoner during the war, though most of the regiment's casualties came from fatal crashes rather than capture. When information about post-war POW interrogations reached the surviving pilots, their reaction was remarkably consistent with their wartime pragmatism. They expressed concern for their captured sister, but no surprise at German reaction. Throughout the period when Germans were capturing and interrogating night witches, their mission tempo never slackened. Their operational record showed consistent sorties regardless of losses or capture, demonstrating the regiment's extraordinary resilience. By the end of hostilities, their 24,000 bombing runs, including countless precision strikes against high-value targets, became documented not just in Soviet records, but in German testimonies that reluctantly acknowledged their effectiveness. When asked years later about German reactions to learning they fought women, one night witch responded, "We did what needed doing. Whether they respected us or feared us or were humiliated by us was their concern. Our concern was victory." The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front. And the night witches were among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9th, 1945, the night witches' final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible. Their collective achievement of 24,000 bombing runs represented one of the most remarkable sustained air campaigns in military history. These missions were accomplished over 3 years of near-continuous operation, from their formation in May 1942 until the final days of the conflict. During this period, each pilot averaged approximately 600 missions, with several exceeding 800 sorties, flying an average of 28 missions per month. Often in conditions that grounded even the most advanced aircraft. They accumulated over 30,000 flight hours collectively, delivering more than 3,000 tons of explosives to German positions. Most night witches survived the war, a testament to both their tactical innovation and the paradoxical protection offered by their obsolete aircraft. Awarded the highest Soviet military decoration, including Hero of the Soviet Union, Orders of the Red Banner, and the Order of the Red Star, they became reluctant symbols of Soviet determination. Their achievement of 24,000 missions came at substantial physical cost. Chronic frostbite scars from open cockpit, flying at -40 degrees, permanent hearing damage from engine noise, and spinal compression from rough landings on improvised airfields. The psychological toll proved equally severe, knowing each night could be their last, yet returning to the air repeatedly despite witnessing comrades fall. The regiment suffered 32 casualties from approximately 80 personnel, a 40% loss rate that would have been catastrophic for any unit, yet remarkably low, considering the danger of their mission. Most losses came not from aerial combat, but from concentrated ground fire, mechanical failure in overworked engines, or navigation errors in the most challenging weather conditions. While each loss devastated the close-knit regiment, their operational tempo never faltered. The day after losing comrade, they flew again. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots completed 40 to 60 missions in their entire careers. American and British bomber crews rotated home after 25-30 missions, considering this a complete combat tour. The Night Witch's 24,000 missions represented the equivalent of 960 complete Allied bomber tours. The average Soviet male bomber pilot completed between 150 to 300 missions before either promotion or death. By this standard, the Night Witches exceeded typical combat exposure by a factor of 4. This operational scale becomes more remarkable when considering resource. If each Night Witch mission averaged 2 hours of flight time, their collective 24,000 sorties represented 48,000 hours airborne, equivalent to 5.5 continuous years of flight. If each mission delivered approximately 200 kilos of explosive, they dropped 4,800 tons of ordnance, enough to destroy hundreds of supply depots, ammunition, command centers, and transportation nodes. German casualties directly attributable to Night Witch operations are estimated at 5,000 or 7,000 killed or wounded, with material destruction valued at over 50 million Reichsmarks. By any metric, the Night Witch's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and they achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to deploy women pilots in combat roles. Their 24,000 combat sorties remain one of the most remarkable sustained air campaigns by any unit of comparable size. Typically operating with 40 flight-ready pilots at any given time, each aircraft flew multiple missions nightly, maximizing the effectiveness of limited resources. Over their operational lifespan, the regiment dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs, a modest figure compared to heavy bomber formation, but devastating when delivered with surgical precision against high-value targets. The regiment's cost-effectiveness represented perfect asymmetric warfare. The entire unit, including aircraft, personnel, maintenance, and ammunition, cost approximately $2 million to field and sustain throughout the war. In contrast, they inflicted damage worth at least 125 million Reichsmarks in direct material destruction, while forcing Germans to expend resources worth another 40 million attempting to counter them. This created an extraordinary cost ratio. For each Soviet ruble invested, Germans expended 60 times that amount, either in losses or countermeasures. Most remarkably, German night fighters achieved 0 confirmed aerial kills against Night Witches, despite thousands of intercept attempts. The stall speed paradox remained unsolved throughout the war, rendering conventional fighters effectively useless against them. Almost all Night Witch losses came from concentrated ground fire, not air combat, a statistical anomaly in a conflict where fighter superiority typically determined air campaign outcome. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value. The psychological warfare aspect of Night Witch operations degraded German combat effectiveness far beyond physical damage. Sleep deprivation became endemic among frontline German units, with documented cases of soldiers requiring sedatives to function after multiple nights of harassment bombing. More than 5,000 German personnel were tied down in anti-Night Witch air defense, resources diverted from offensive operations. Supply lines required rerouting, often along longer and more vulnerable routes, to avoid known Night Witch hunting ground. Their propaganda value proved equally significant. For Soviet civilians, the Night Witches represented proof that Soviet women could fight effectively against the Nazi war machine. For German leadership, they exposed critical flaws in intelligence assessment and tactical doctrine that had catastrophic ramifications beyond this specific regiment. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoir, "The Night Witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them. No other unit in the Soviet Air Force matched their efficiency ratio." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering. The Night Witch's 24,000 bombing runs embodied this principle. After the war ended, the Night Witches faced a different kind of challenge, returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat. Initially celebrated as heroes of the Soviet Union, featured in victory parades and propaganda speeches, they soon encountered the complex reality of post-war Soviet society. Many continued in aviation as civilian pilots or instructors, their thousands of flight hours qualifying them for positions normally requiring years of additional training. Others entered technical fields or education, bringing the same determination to rebuilding their shattered country. Their transition proved difficult. After years of making split-second decisions with life-or-death consequences, mundane civilian problems seemed trivial. Many struggled with what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress, startling at sudden noises, experiencing nightmares of being caught in searchlight, or feeling survivors' guilt for comrades lost. Most married and raised families, often telling their children sanitized versions of their wartime experience, if they spoke of them at all. The surviving pilots maintained lifelong bonds with their regiment comrades. Annual reunions became traditions, with attendance gradually diminishing as age claimed those who German flak could not. Their public recognition in the Soviet Union fluctuated with political winds, celebrated during periods when female accomplishments served the state's narrative, relegated to historical footnotes when traditional gender roles were emphasized. Their decorations remained impressive by any standard. Between them, the regiment received 23 Hero of the Soviet Union medals, the nation's highest honor, along with hundreds of orders of the Red Banner, Red Star, and Patriotic War Medal. Soviet military histories documented their mission, though often with ideological framing that emphasized communist dedication over tactical brilliance. When Stalin died in 1953, those he had personally praised faced potential danger as Khrushchev consolidated power, leading some to downplay their wartime recognition. For decades, the Night Witches remained virtually unknown in the West. Cold War tensions ensured Soviet achievements were routinely dismissed as propaganda in Western military assessment. German testimony about their effectiveness remained buried in classified intelligence archives, and translated Soviet accounts were considered unreliable exaggeration. This obscurity began changing in the 1980s, when Gorbachev's glasnost policy allowed more accurate historical accounts to emerge. Western historians gained limited access to Soviet military archives, discovering corroborating documentation for what had previously been dismissed as myth. By the 1990s, with Soviet archives more fully open, the first scholarly Western accounts appeared, validating the Night Witches' operational record through multiple sources. The 21st century brought broader recognition through books, documentaries, and museum exhibitions. The Russian Air Force Museum expanded its Night Witches display, while aviation museums worldwide began including their story. Monuments were erected in cities from which the regiment had operated, and schools adopted their names to inspire new generations. Though delayed by decades, this recognition confirmed what German prisoners had admitted immediately after the war. The Night Witches represented one of the most effective combat aviation units in military history. The story of the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering universal lessons about warfare, underestimation, and human determination. Their tactical innovations demonstrated that asymmetric approaches can defeat technological superiority when applied with discipline and creativity. The psychological impact of their operations, particularly their silent bombing technique, often exceeded physical damage, proving that fear can be as effective as firepower in degrading enemy capabilities. The German failure to counter their operation exemplifies how prejudice creates military vulnerability. By dismissing women as unsuitable for combat and POW biplanes obsolete training craft, German commanders blind themselves to the actual threat. Their assumption that speed, power, and technology would inevitably triumph prevented adaptation to the Night Witches' unconventional approach. What Germans perceived as weaknesses, slow speed, wooden construction, minimal equipment, became strengths in the specific operational context of the Eastern Front. The physical and psychological resilience required to complete 24,000 missions defies easy comprehension. Each sortie required navigating through concentrated anti-aircraft fire, often in brutal weather conditions, in aircraft offering no protection beyond canvas skin. Each mission could be their last, yet they continued night after night, accumulating sortie counts that dwarfed even the most accomplished male pilots. Their survival required not just extraordinary skill, but a refusal to accept limitations others considered immutable. Perhaps most significantly, their story demonstrates that engineering principles must serve operational reality, not theoretical ideal. The PO-2's simple design proved more survivable than complex metal aircraft when facing certain threats. Understanding the stall-speed paradox allowed them to exploit physics itself as protection. Their operational constraints forced innovations like the silent gliding approach that sophisticated aircraft couldn't match. The right tool for a specific mission isn't always the most advanced. Sometimes it's the one adapted perfectly to its environment. On April 22, 1945, when Night Witches climbed into their PO-2s for the last of their 24,000 bombing runs, they represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with German ridicule and evolved into German terror. The officers who had laughed at women flying crop dusters never grasped the fundamental lesson. Military effectiveness isn't measured by technological sophistication, but by results. These young women, most barely in their 20s, had systematically exposed the fallacy of German superiority through physics, psychology, and sheer determination. The Night Witches hadn't just completed mission. They had demonstrated that courage doesn't require the best equipment, that tactical innovation trumps raw power, and that determination can make physics itself irrelevant. In wooden biplanes that engineering manuals declared unsuitable for combat, they proved the most dangerous weapon isn't necessarily the most powerful one. It's the one your enemy doesn't know how to stop.